Hello, welcome to yet another installment of Emma Reads So Many Books for absolutely no reason other than she just kind of decided she wanted to. Not even necessarily that she wanted to read those books specifically, but that she wanted to read books to accomplish a different goal, which in this case is an understanding of 20th century Chinese history, mainly through fiction. This time around, I'm just constantly breaking my own rules. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna read 3 books from every decade translated from Chinese. And I'm like, oh, but I could only find this one by a Chinese author who wrote it in English. So, like, I guess that's fine. And then this time around, like, well, the only third book I could find was a memoir, which is not actually fiction, but I needed to pick something. So I'll go through these 3 books that I'm going to read this month. We have The Real Story of Anchee and Other Tales of China by Lu Xun. This one, listen, when I was in the throes of writing my thesis and just trying to put things off and waste time as much as possible, I actually wrote emails to a bunch of professors of East Asian literature at various universities across the country asking if anyone had any recommendations for 1910s literature translated into English because I couldn't find very much. And one of those professors recommended Lu Xun. So this is all very short stories. Like when I'm looking at the table of contents, they seem to range from like 3 to 10 pages generally. And they have names like Medicine, Tomorrow, A Minor Incident, Hair, A Passing Storm, My Old Home, Dragon Boat Festival, etc., etc. That will be an interesting read. Some of this definitely takes place in the 1910s, even though most of it was not written in the 1910s. Some of them were written in the 1910s, like, for example, Diary of a Madman was published in April 1918. But then even with The Real Story of Anchee, like the title work, that one was published in 1921. Somewhere in here I noticed that it says that the story starts in like 1911. And 1911 is when the revolution against the imperial system happened, the 1911 revolution. And so it would make sense that Lu Xun has a lot to say about that period. So that's Lu Xun's The Real Story of Anchee and Other Stories. And then there is my compromise, because I just wanted to have 3 books. 2 Years in the Forbidden City by the Princess Ling. Oh, wait, no, this is really important. I just was talking about this. Okay, this was written by Lu Xun and it was translated by Julia Lavelle. Thank you so much, Julia Lavelle. I really appreciate your work on this. And then 2 Years in the Forbidden City, a memoir by the Princess Ling. And I think I read on Wikipedia that she published this in 1911. This is a memoir of a lady-in-waiting of the last Empress of the Qing Dynasty, Empress Dowager. I think it's Cixi. I think it is. I'll learn how to pronounce that. I promise. In this video for sure. And look, it's not that long. This one looks like it's not that long, but it is. It just has super thin pages. It's 402 pages long. So that, like, look, it does not look that long. This one though is 212 pages. That's not bad. I can do that. And then we have Dragon Springs Road by Janie Chang. As you can see, this one's a bit more contemporary. It was published in 2017. But remember, this arbitrary standard I've set for myself is that I'm reading books that take place in that decade, not were written or published in that decade. This one counts. This one is about a girl, a biracial girl, growing up in 1910s China as the bond servant of a wealthy family, and what that's like for her. Janie Chang, it says, was born in Taiwan and spent part of her childhood in the Philippines, Iran, and Thailand. You know what? That counts. That's part of the Chinese diaspora. So I'm really interested in seeing how a contemporary author approaches this era and some of the main issues that will come up. And then also, to make up for my disastrous last book in the 1900s video that I made, I'm also going to be reading Empress Orchid by Anchee. That one is a fictionalized telling of the life of Empress Dowager Cixi, which I'm really excited about and I think will be very juicy. So I'm going to start listening to that one on audiobook first. So there we go. That is my introduction to a lot of books. I mean, I got this one straight from the library, but these ones I had to get on interlibrary loan. Just all of these books that I am collecting from all across the state. in order to accomplish this strange task I've set for myself. Right now, I am halfway through listening to Empress Orchid, and I'm having a great time. It's kind of slow because it's detailing a lot of the mundane, everyday details of the main character's life as she lives as a concubine in the emperor's court. But I love learning just about what her life is like. I love the politics, the intrigue, the eunuchs spying on everyone, the bribery, all of the subtle, tricky little details that the main character has to keep in mind in order to get ahead in the Forbidden City. I'm really having a fun time with it. It's based off of the real life of the last empress of the Qing dynasty, who is remembered kind of in disgrace now, but this depicts her in a fairly positive, sympathetic light, which I'm loving because I think there's a lot of bias. I think there's a lot of hindsight bias and a lot of misogynistic bias towards her in historical record. I like how in Empress Orchid, the main character Orchid, that is the nickname that she goes by, gets ahead by using emotional intelligence as well as wit and strategy. And you can really tell that the author has put so much effort into researching for this book, because even if all of the details of how Orchid's life looks aren't necessarily accurate down to the letter, you can tell that she's done enough research to make all of these details seem very believable. It all meshes very well. There's a fair amount of subtle humor to some of it, to some of the things that Orchid goes through. I think that a lot of people who just enjoy general historical fiction would really like it. I'm having a great time so far, and I'm really glad that I decided to pick it up to make up for the death of Yuli. So I'm excited for this decade so far. I'm excited to learn about all of the court ladies. Okay, so I just finished listening to Empress Orchid. It was 100% my thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be your thing, because it was pretty slow, pretty historical detail heavy, didn't have a super coherent plot arc, but I still loved it because I am a sucker for East Asian history and just the drama of the imperial Chinese court. This is based off of the life of Empress Dowager Cixi. She is villainized in history for being the evil empress who stole power and brought about the downfall of the Qing dynasty. But I think that this book does a really excellent job of showing I thought it was okay. I'm not an expert on the late Qing dynasty court politics, but just from a cursory glance at Wikipedia, it seems like all of the major events that happen in the novel are things that really happened. And I have always really subscribed to the idea that the Empress Dowager has just been villainized because of misogyny and hindsight, when really she did everything that a politically savvy man would have done in her place, and did similar things to plenty of male emperors throughout Chinese history. And I thought that it made all of the different moving parts of court politics very easy to understand, very twisty and fun to follow along. It also, there's no way for us to know what kind of person the Empress really was, but just considering what kind of decisions she had to make, I thought that it did a good job keeping her very consistent, and I thought that all of her decisions made a lot of sense for her as a person and her values and her desires. And I'm always just a sucker for a girl who rises to the top because she's beautiful and ruthless and smart. Ugh, all about it. So excited. I think that this would appeal to a lot of people who like historical fiction. I thought it was very fun, absorbing. I really felt like I was in the setting that it was portraying. I had a really good time. Oh, but also, oh no, I'm just doomed to never read 3 books from between 1900 and 1909, because I looked at the Empress Dowager's her date of death, and I noticed that it was in the early 1900s. So I was like, oh, if this is about her life and it ends with her death, then I'll cover the early 1900s. But it doesn't cover her entire life leading up to her death. It's just her life up until the emperor dies, and then she grabs power by putting her son in power. It ends in the 1860s at some point. So I still haven't read 3 books from the early 1900s. Whoops, but it was fun. I had a great time. I liked it a lot. 4 stars. Hello. I'm halfway through Dragon Springs Road, and it is so boring. It's so boring. Oh my gosh. I think if I wasn't reading this for a specific project, I would drop it. It is so. Oh my gosh, it is just unbearable. So it's about this girl who is half Chinese, half European. Her mother's Chinese and her father is an unknown European man, and she is abandoned by her mother in the house where they used to live. Then another family buys that house and like keeps her as a bond servant. Just about her life doing that. It starts in like 1908 and then like keeps going from there. There have been some mentionings of 1910s events. It was a very tumultuous political period where lots of different people took power and lost power, and that's interesting. But there's not really a plot. She befriended a European girl who then disappeared, and then she started school, and everyone's mean to her. And then she tried to find her mother, but she can't find her. Like, nothing, there's no like overall story, and none of those smaller little stories are interesting. And like the writing is fine, like it's just that the overall like the writing style is fine, it's just the overall structure is boring and I don't care. And then there's this like kind of side thing happening. I can't call it a side plot because nothing's actually happening, there's no plot, but this girl is friends with a fox spirit that can either take the form of a fox or a woman, and then that fox talks to her about stuff. You could completely take this element out of the book and it would change nothing because the fox just kind of tells her encouraging stuff and like it tells her about some of like the lore of being a fox spirit, but this does not make any actual difference in her life at all. And then also I just feel like this is, how many pages is this? This is 367 pages, and like it's cataloged as an adult novel, but the way it is written and the content of the book, it's not just young adult, it's like middle grade. Like I think that like a sixth grader could very easily understand everything that's going on, but it's not fun like most middle grade books are. I'm sorry, I'm being so mean about that. I'm not having a good time at all. But okay, the one thing that I'm cool with is that since it is so simplistic, it is so easy to read, I can read it really fast. So I read this much in like a day, and I'm going to read the rest of it tonight, and then I'll be done. And I won't have to deal with it. I normally rate things as 1 star if I find them like deeply unpleasant in some way or like offensive. But if I just overall don't enjoy reading something enough, then I will rate it as 1 star. And so right now we're at 1 star because I'm just so bored. It's so meaningless. But if something interesting happens in that second half, maybe I'll bump it up to 2 stars. But right now, not having a good time. I dragged myself through the last little bit of Dragon Springs Road, and yeah, 1 star. I think it's such a surface level exploration of the conditions and events in this book. How do I describe this category of book in a way that's not offensive? It's the sort of book that I would expect to see on like a rack in the grocery store that maybe like your grandma might buy. Not my grandma. My grandma's cool and reads really good stuff, but that someone's grandma would buy and be like, oh my gosh, it's so exotic, place in China, but it doesn't actually go into depth into any of the things people are going through and why things were the way that they were. And there's all this stuff with the fox spirit, like what the fox spirit. Okay, so the fox spirit basically like influences people to make certain decisions, like gives little nudges to people to make certain decisions, then like comforts the main character Jialing during hard times. And I think both of those make the story worse because if she's influencing people to make she's not influencing people to make any like radical decisions, like anything like particularly interesting. They're all decisions that I think that they could have just made themselves, and that would have made them more interesting characters instead of them being so insubstantial that they need a supernatural creature to hypnotize them into making pretty basic decisions that I think would have been way more interesting if they were just their own decisions. And then I guess she's Jialing's friend, which is fine, but she has other friends. Why can't her other friends say those things at her? I don't know. And then at the end, she's like, hey, Jialing, I can turn you into a fox spirit. I've been preparing you your whole life and like telling you what it's like to be a fox, and I can turn you into one, and you would have all these powers. You could like change your appearance. You could influence people's behavior. You could live forever. Fox spirits can live forever. They don't die from old age or getting sick or starving. but they can be killed. So she's like, you basically live forever. You'd have like a way easier life. You get everything you want, because that's like whole story. Ling is like trying to find a job and keeps like not getting a job. At one point, she does become the mistress of a man. That's where things get not so middle grade, a little more young adult, is because she does refer to him making love to her. Ooh. So she finally, is the mistress of this rich man, and that's how she's able to survive. Which is interesting. I wish it would like talk more about the emotional impact of that decision, but no, it's just like, and then I became his mistress. Okay. She's like, yeah, you could have all these powers that would make it like way easier to get by in your life. And she's like, I'll think about it. And then she thinks about it and she's like, no, I'm not going to do that, because experiencing so much heartbreak in my life has been so hard. And if I live forever, then I just keep experiencing more heartbreak the more that I like meet people. Which, like, I guess that's always like the big thing about immortality, right? Is that you have to like keep living while you watch people you love die. But like, I don't know. It seems to me that she could become a fox spirit, and fox spirits can still take the form of human people. Use her powers to get ahead in life, because her life is going bad and all of her opportunities keep falling through. Then once she gets sick of being a fox spirit, even if it's just after the length of a normal human lifetime, to just like find a way to get killed. I think that would be reasonable. I feel like that's win-win. Live as long as you want to, not necessarily forever, but like live with fox spirit powers. Seems like a good deal to me. But no, she's like, I can't, which I just thought was a boring decision. Really? She could have become like a powerful fox spirit. And she's like, no, too hard. I don't buy it. There was also like a couple of different romantic plots. They just kind of appeared that I just thought weren't that romantic. It really wasn't much of anything. It had this murder. No, it had this disappearance of a little girl that was, maybe it was supernatural, I guess. I thought that was set up weird. And then nothing came of that. That wasn't a mystery or anything. There were a couple of little romantic plots, except that there was never like a romance. It was just kind of like, and then this guy was like into me. And I was like, okay. So it wasn't romantic. It did shoehorn some historical events in there, but didn't really like go into detail about like implications or meaning of those events. So not that historical. And it was boring. So like not that dramatic. It just did nothing. So just due to how much of a drag it was, I'm giving it 1 star. We're done. Hello, it's late at night. I keep meaning to film about this, and now I'm, I don't know, how far is that? Can you tell? Like 2/3 the way through The Real Story of Anchee and Other Tales of China by Lu Xun. And I have to say, I am having a good time, but intellectually, not emotionally or creatively. I'm learning a lot about a lot of the ideas that were going around at this time and the impact of certain historical events, but not many of the stories have been like fun or intriguing. It's just a lot of discussing ideas and politics and stuff. It does have a really helpful introduction by the translator all about Lu Xun, what he was trying to accomplish. He's like the father of modern Chinese literature, wanted China to abandon traditional Chinese values and Confucianism and adopt Western values and traditions. And so he started writing fiction heavily influenced by Western work, and was one of the first people to write in like vernacular Chinese, is my understanding. The Real Story of Anchee is his only novella, and then the rest of this is all of his short stories. I really liked the short story Diary of a Madman. It's quite short but very effective. That one is about a man who's convinced that everyone in his town are cannibals who are eventually going to try and eat him. The introduction explained that that's kind of a metaphor for how Lu Xun believed that everyone in China who wanted to continue with like traditional Confucian beliefs and systems was crazy and backwards and holding the country back. But also it was just like a fun concept of this guy being paranoid that everyone is going to eat him. And then Anchee was this story about like a handyman, basically like a village handyman who's also kind of stupid and has ringworm. There's a lot of descriptions of people with ringworm in these stories. I guess that was a really big concern at the time. And just kind of his antics and mess ups and stuff. And I wasn't really sure about the point of the whole story, but then I looked it up and Wikipedia says that it's supposed to be a commentary on how the 1911 revolution had no impact on the countryside. And it's like, okay, yeah, I can tell there was no impact. I do think that the translation's beautiful. It conveys some really gorgeous language that I'm really enjoying. And I am having a good time just like, yeah, again, intellectually processing what Lu Xun is trying to say and the values and thoughts of the time. But I'm not having fun. You know, I'm not miserable. I'm just not having fun. I would recommend it to someone who's really into China because it gives insight into a very specific time of turmoil in Chinese history. But I wouldn't recommend it if you're like looking to have a good time. This is purely an academic intellectual exercise. But I think I should finish it soon, so we'll be okay. So I finished The Real Story of Anchee and Other Stories, that collection. So it's in chronological order of the different collections that he wrote all put together. Near the end, he has a collection of like rewritten folktales / short stories inspired by different folktales and things like that. And in that one, there was some kind of interesting elements. The one that I remember the most is one about the creation goddess Nuwa and her interactions with human beings, and how they keep approaching her and asking for like her opinions on war and like who's the most righteous, and she keeps being like, I'm just hanging out here making mountains and I don't know what war is and I don't know what you're talking about. And it's really funny. And then at one point, like, a scholar does approach her and say that she is like morally reprehensible under the law because she is naked. And I thought that was really funny and astute. A fun commentary on traditional Chinese values, and yeah, about how more recent developments in Chinese culture don't hold up against like their own cultural foundations and traditions, which I just thought was really funny. I like the way that it was done. Other than that, though, I don't really remember anything that I read. I remember that one. I remember The Diary of Madman, and I remember Anchee and all of his ringworm. And other than that, couldn't tell you. It's all left my mind. It just really didn't grab me at all. I'm really glad that we get to have this insight into that time period, but just didn't do much for me. Now I am a lot of the way finished with 2 Years in the Forbidden City by Princess Ling. She's a princess because the Empress promoted her to that title, essentially. And this one I'm really enjoying, but also it's boring. Because it's mostly just descriptions of things in the Forbidden City. Here's every single decoration on this bed frame, and here's every single item of jewelry that the Empress was wearing, the exact dimensions of the throne room, and like, yeah, just the sizes of things and the amount of things, the numbers of things, and just very dry descriptions of stuff. But then, I don't know, I just love the historical detail, the insight into what life was like in this very specific time, little pocket of time. And that also, Princess Ling was the son of basically the Chinese ambassador in France. And so she spent a lot of her life in France. She's very young. It doesn't say did it say how old she is? Teens, 20s, when she enters the Forbidden City as an attendant to the Empress. I really think it's interesting how she brings a little bit of an outsider's perspective into what the Forbidden City is like, because she can navigate it very comfortably, already being familiar with Chinese etiquette and language and education, but being used to French society, French everyday culture. And so the observations that she has in this are much easier to connect to than if it was just a Chinese person telling you what the Forbidden City is like. The things that surprise her are things that are interesting and surprising to me as well. It's just too bad that her writing style is just so dull. It's really interesting reading this after reading Empress Orchid. The author Empress Orchid definitely read this in preparation, to do research, because I recognize some of the little details of the kind of quirks that the Empress has that were mentioned in Empress Orchid. Oh, also, I'm so sorry. Guess what? I messed up again. This does not take place in the 1910s. It takes place in like 1903 to 1905 and was published in 1911. So once again, I have failed to get the right time period, but it's just so hard. There's just not very much around the turn of the century. This does mean that I'll have read 3 books from the 1900s, but now only 2 books from the 1910s. The Empress will die in 1908, and so 1903 to 1905 is near the end of her life. She's quite old, but she still has so much energy, and she's clearly so intelligent. So intelligent. She's so fascinated by new technology and inventions, and wants everything to be explained to her in detail, and really wants to understand everything that's around her. And she clearly is very socially in tune. She knows how to navigate lots of different situations. She's just so impressive. She's so impressive to me. I got a little emotional in this sequence where the author was talking about the first time the Empress got her photograph taken, and that she was so focused on like understanding how the camera worked and what the different parts were and what it did and how the photographs were developed, and that she sat in the dark room watching the photographer for 2 hours, asking him questions about the process of developing photographs and like how it worked. She was so brilliant and had such an incredible mind, but because she used that mind, implemented her ideas and plans the way that a man would, she was villainized and demonized for it. And I love her. So I would recommend this if you're a China nerd. This is such a fun, like, just so much fun insight into what this is like. So far, I'm enjoying it for nerd reasons, not because not because I'm enthralled in the writing or anything. So that's how we're doing. Almost done. So I'll wrap this up soon. All right, so I finished 2 Years in the Forbidden City by the Princess Ling. I can't say that I have any new feelings about it. I learned a lot. I was not kept particularly engaged throughout all of it. She just described so many things. It was interesting that there was she adores the Empress, but there's occasional conflict, occasional friction around the fact that the Queen kept trying to arrange a marriage for her like 3 times or something, and Ling kept being like, "Oh no, I never want to be married, Empress. I never want to leave your side. I just want to live here in the palace, and I never want to be married. I have no interest in marriage." But I got the impression that was really that just she had been raised in the West and wanted to choose her own husband, and then she went on to marry an American. So that's cool, good for her. It's very impersonal telling. She does say like, "Oh, I really like my time there. Other people really criticize the Empress a lot, which I never experienced. Like, she had a little bit of a temper sometimes, but like, it was very manageable. We just, she was in a bad mood sometimes. We're around her 24/7, so we're gonna see bad moods." There weren't very many personal details about like just what it was like for her. It was really just like, this is what was there and what happened. So, but that is 1910s China. I have to say, the one I would recommend the most would be Empress Orchid, which isn't 1910s China and it isn't even 1900s China. It's 1800s. It's 1860s China. But I do think it is the most fun to read. Definitely would appeal to anyone who likes historical fiction. The other 3, I would recommend 2 Years in the Forbidden City and The Real Story of Akyu to any mega China nerd. I would not recommend Dragon Springs Road to anyone. It was interesting to kind of get a feel for the political turmoil happening in this decade. But other than that, let's see, the 2 books that were actually in 1910s were Akyu and Dragon Springs Road. They had very little in common. The stories in Anchee were often common people. Dragon Springs Road was like very glamorous, kind of observing the high class. They mentioned similar historical events, but yeah, didn't learn a ton when comparing the 2. It was really fun in my extras about the Empress to compare kind of what I learned from the historical account versus the fictionalized account. Okay, what I did learn in this book and the rest of this book is that in Empress Orchid, there's this whole saga of how she put her son on the throne and made herself the regent, and like that it ends like right after she does that. But in this book, it mentions that son that she put on the throne died when he was like 20, and then her nephew took the throne. Her nephew, because she managed to arrange a marriage between her sister and like a prince, and so then the nephew gets put on the throne, and she is the Empress Dowager behind the nephew. So that was really interesting because the sister and her new husband were characters in Empress Orchid. So it was interesting to be like, oh, so that's what happens to them later. Very interesting perspectives. Up next is the 20s. Obviously, 20s comes after 10s. And so all 3 of you, I hope you join me then. Bye-bye.